Hey guys, I'm Alexis Urquhart, and this is my oral presentation for my last college class ever. My major is University Studies with the concentrations in business, healthcare, and organizational leadership. This is the last class I have, and it's the only class I'm taking this summer, so that's been nice. I work full time at University Medical Center as a health unit coordinator, and so my topic really means a lot to me because I took it from my personal job and my personal experiences. Um, my topic is, or topic question is, how can business and healthcare education combine to get better healthcare in rural areas? Um, my disciplines are healthcare and business, so this is exactly from what I'm graduating from. So hopefully I can put this on my LinkedIn and just show a little work that I've put out there with my final paper. Um, this is also important to me because I really care about the medical field. Um, Although I want to be on the business administration side of it, it's very important to me. I think living in Amarillo, Texas, and Lubbock, Texas, my whole life, we are in pretty rural areas. Although Lubbock has a great healthcare system, it's because of Texas Tech and the nursing program, as well as the medical schools here, that Texas Tech and Lubbock have such a great hospital. Um, this is an interdisciplinary problem because there's so much stuff that goes into hospitals and healthcare. I use a horizontal technique for my paper, which overlaps these disciplines. And again, my disciplines are business and healthcare education for this paper. Um, I added on the education to healthcare because healthcare is so broad that I think it needs to be narrowed down a little to where are people going to be learning, and um, what are they going to be learning? What can they learn that will better suit them for rural areas? Um, Another factor in my paper is recruiting doctors, um, medical staff, and nurses, and everybody else who's going to staff these hospitals, as well as schools like Texas Tech. The pros is living in a rural area is having better relationships with your patients. Living in smaller towns, obviously, that's kind of self explanatory. Living in huge places like Houston, you might not know your doctor as well. You might be best friends with them, but in small towns, it's a little more close knit, and that's just one pro to point out to medical staff and things like that. One fact I learned from my research was whenever students learn in rural areas like Lubbock, Texas, they're more likely to stay and practice in smaller places like Amarillo or Lubbock or anywhere. This is more important to me also because I work in labor and delivery 2 nights out of 5, and we have women flown in all the time from New Mexico because they're in labor. They don't have time to drive 3 hours, or sometimes they don't have a ride to drive 3 hours, so they have to fly in just to have a baby, and that's a huge medical cost on top of all the cost of just having a child already. And that's a really big deal. Women or their families shouldn't have to go out of the way for just normal everyday things that, um, like having a baby, you shouldn't have to worry. Complications happen, and you should be able to get to a healthcare facility that can help you with that as soon as you can, and it shouldn't be a big struggle. Not to mention C-sections. Some places, oddly enough, can deliver babies, but they can't do C-sections, which is just crazy because of complications that happen. Um, when researching for my problem, I learned that healthcare education requires a lot of background knowledge. Um, just like starting a new company will require statistics on previous trial and error projects, it's important to collect a lot of data and um, just experiences through people telling stories and research, because you would never just try to build a business from your own knowledge, especially if you don't have any yourself. So that's really important in my paper, is first collecting a lot of data and research. Next, federal grants are really important to start businesses, from healthcare education and colleges and nursing programs and doctor programs, to hospitals and clinics and places you can get your medications, such as pharmacies, and paying pharmaceutical reps and everything that goes into that, which is a lot more than I can name right now. But federal grants are in works to start projects. They've started a lot already, but that's very important, and that's a big aspect of this problem. That's why it's interdisciplinary, because there's just so many things. Like, there's not an answer to this problem. It's complex. It'll never be finished. I'm talking about rural areas in America where we have third world countries that aren't even close to what Lubbock, Texas, or Amarillo, Texas has. So that's why it's really important to consider all of these different aspects and combine them, overlap them, and organize them, which is what I'm doing for my paper. Pharmacists is really important, which a lot of people don't think of just medicine being that big of a deal, but if you've ever gone to get a prescription here in Lubbock, I know I have, and they're out of something at one store, they'll contact another one as soon as they can, and they'll have it for you that day. And that's super important in small towns where they may have one pharmacy. They need to have everything ready to go and answers for patients, because it's very important to have that, and medicine can be very timely. Rural areas have higher rates of smoking, obesity, diabetes, and other chronic diseases. That's another reason that pharmacists are so important in rural areas. Health policy reforms emphasizes on community participation. There are health policy reforms that focus on growing rural healthcare, and community participation is everything for that. It's a big deal. That's why a lot of healthcare facilities in the past have shut down, because communities aren't worried about. Some people aren't worried about taking care of themselves. Some people can't afford it or don't know that there's options like Medicaid and Medicare. But right now they're fixing that, and they're educating the communities, not just the healthcare, like nurses and doctors. They need to educate communities why they should go in, what they can do to help, like maybe they become nurses themselves. If you're from a rural community and you go to school, you're more likely to go back to your rural community or a rural community and be a practitioner there, and that's really important. Healthcare is the fastest growing segment of the economy. That's one of the reasons I also chose this. It's always going to be an issue. It's just very important. Everywhere needs healthcare, and since it is the fastest growing, federal grants are being answered when they're worried that it may be a concern that they're not, but they are being answered. They just have to get their ducks in a row and make sure that these places will be successful, because there's no reason to be throwing money down the drain. The main conflict for my paper is inherent. No one wants to invest time and money without knowing there will be a positive outcome. Like I just said, there's so many aspects to consider. The common ground is the end goal. Obviously, it's important to have better healthcare everywhere we can, to keep bettering it where it's at, and to make it better where it's lacking. The interdisciplinary perspective, that both concentrations completely rely on each other, is another common factor with this paper. whenever you think about the business aspect of it, business making these businesses, they're healthcare businesses, so healthcare education is automatically going to go into that. Whenever you think about healthcare education, that's business. Like school, learning, teaching, that's all a business. Where your hospitals, doctor's offices, those are businesses. So they just really already overlap. And that was helpful, but also confusing whenever writing my paper. But I split it, and it just made it really easier to intertwine these because they rely on each other, and that's why this is a complex problem. It's not going to be easy to solve, or it's not really solvable because I'll always be working on it, but they really, you can't just solve it with one concentration, which is important to know, which we all should know by now. In my conclusion, I use a technique, organization, which just organizing what should happen in a row to start getting things done. Things are getting done, but to continue on it, make it better. First, it's to collect the data. Like I said earlier, there's been a lot done, but collect the data, trial and error with the past, so we don't have to do that anymore. Learn what worked best, what didn't work, and then from that, do your own research. In certain areas, things might work better than other areas. Whether you're talking about New York or Texas, everything's going to work different. Next is to get the federal funding, and then next is to make healthcare education in rural areas like Texas Tech. We don't struggle with a nice hospital. We have UMC because we have medical students here. People move up, they sign contracts. People might move through a lot, but it's all positive promotions. When they leave, we get someone brand new who knows everything and learned everything from them. So that's the goal is to continue that in other rural areas. And last is to promote community involvement. That's key to keeping this successful and making the businesses can start, but the community needs to be involved. And they need to have their own healthcare education. They need to know what they should look for to take care of, and it's really up to the communities to help these medical professionals make this successful. So that's what my paper is about. This is the last thing. I'm very excited. Congrats to everyone or anyone who watches this video that is graduating on the 12th with me. I hope y'all enjoyed this video and have a great summer.